So it is now my great honor to introduce to you Long Bright River author. It's Liz Moore.
Thank you so much. It's really, really nice to be here. Thank you. And thanks to the viewers, the members of the book club, for choosing it too.
Thank you for being there, for sure. Now, Liz, when I say thank you for being here, obviously this is a weird setup. But where exactly are you? Are you in Philadelphia right now?
I am. Yep. I live in South Philadelphia. How about you?
Are you in South Philly?
Yeah.
I'm in South Philly too.
Oh, that's amazing. That's so funny. I feel like I should wave out the window. Hello.
Yeah, I'm not far from East Passyunk.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a little bit north of there, but same neighborhood. Wow. Yeah.
But you were not born in Philly, were you?
No, I was born in Massachusetts, to New York for college and grad school, and I met my future husband in New York, who is from the Philadelphia area. All right. And so when I finished my education, I applied for jobs in Philadelphia, and he and I moved here a little over a decade ago, and we've been here ever since.
And do you love it?
I love it. I really can't speak highly enough of Philadelphia.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that I found it, and I have no plans to leave anytime. So it's really home at this point.
You teach there too, right?
Yeah, I teach at Temple University in North Philadelphia. And for a long time before that, I was teaching at a different university in the Northeast part of Philadelphia.
Oh, great. Yeah, I've only just myself moved to Philly about 2 years ago. Same thing, following the boyfriend. Yeah. And I love it. You know, I think it's an amazing city. People are so friendly, and they've got dogs everywhere, which is amazing.
Yes, dogs everywhere, really good restaurants everywhere. Doesn't apply so much during a pandemic, but really good takeout still.
Yeah. Now, talking about the pandemic, what have you been doing during the pandemic? Have you maybe written a little bit more? Are we expecting a new book soon?
So I teach virtually now through Temple MFA program. So that's part of what I do. I am at work on another novel, which I can't talk about yet, but I'm working on it. And I'm working on the adaptation of Long Bright River. It's been optioned as a limited series. So assuming there's a strong possibility that it will become a limited series. And then I also have 2 little kids. So a big part of my days are taking care of them.
Wow, that sounds like a busy schedule. How old are your kids?
4 and 1.
Oh, yeah, so you are very busy. Bless you.
Yeah, it's been a chaotic time since March, as many people will relate to, I'm sure.
And how's teaching online? How hard is it for the students and you?
It's not, certainly not my first choice. I think there's a real kind of energy to in-person teaching that's difficult to duplicate. But I will say I've been surprisingly pleased with how it's translated to an online format. I think it's, we focus, I'm teaching a writing workshop at Temple right now. And it's really, it's still possible to do the work of critiquing student writing through an online format. So, we use Zoom, and all the students' faces are populated there, and we can sort of call on each individual student. And I think it's as effective. It just lacks the sort of collegiality and intimacy of an in-person workshop.
Yeah, it makes everything a bit colder, isn't it?
I think that's true, yeah.
Right. Now, as you may know, the book club, we had a deadline, and the deadline was just last Sunday. So all of our readers should have finished the book, and if they haven't, well, it's on them anyway. And what we've done is we've actually asked them to submit their questions to us. We selected 8 of them, and I think if you're okay, we should get straight into it. Are you happy with that?
That sounds good.
Okay, great. So what I'll do is I'll be reading the questions for you, yeah?
Okay, sounds good.
Fabulous. So the first one is from Anne-Marie from Pennsylvania. And she says, you describe the horrors of addiction, but also shed a light on how tight this community can be and how substance users help each other out. Is it something that you witnessed yourself?
I'm sorry, that I would miss myself?
That you have witnessed yourself.
Oh, witness. So yes, I've certainly. So I'll tell you briefly about how I came to the material and my connection to Kensington and to the book. So Long Bright River is set in a neighborhood in Philadelphia called Kensington, which nowadays is covered a lot in local and national media as one of the sort of hotbeds of opioid use and sales in the Northeast. But back in 2009, when I arrived in Philadelphia, I didn't know anything about it. I was invited by a photographer friend named Jeffrey Stockbridge to collaborate on a photo essay about Kensington. And my role when I initially visited the neighborhood with him was to interview the subjects of his portraits that he was making. So back in 2009, I went with him a handful of times, and that's what initially got me interested in the neighborhood. So in that capacity, certainly I witnessed a lot of transactions that occurred on the street. Subsequently, I found myself kind of drawn back to the neighborhood over and over again because I was very moved by what I saw. And also because I have a personal connection in the sense that my family, like many families in the United States, has a multi-generational history of addiction. And so I think the emotional impetus for my returning over and over again to the neighborhood and wanting to learn more about the neighborhood came from that. Eventually, I began running free writing workshops at a women's day shelter in Philadelphia called the Thea Bowman Center, which is affiliated with St. Francis Inn, which is a really wonderful, longstanding organization in Kensington. And so through all of that work combined, oh yeah, that's Father Mike. Father Michael Duffy runs St. Francis Inn in Kensington, and he's a wonderful soul, as are all the people who volunteer there and work there, and who are clients of St. Francis Inn as well. Through all of that work combined, I guess to answer the question, I have certainly seen a lot in Kensington, and that sort of served as my primary inspiration for Long Bright River.
Mm-hmm. I get it. Did you ever feel like when you were in Kensington, did you feel that it was too dangerous or that you could be harmed in any way?
No, I've never had that feeling. For a lot of people, Kensington is their home. It's where they live and sometimes work. It's a very vibrant neighborhood in a lot of ways. It's also experiencing a moment of transition, for better or worse, because it's pretty rapidly gentrifying. So, shorthand for Kensington 5 or 10 years ago was as a very kind of high crime neighborhood, which in and of itself is sort of an unfair description of it for a variety of reasons. But today, when we say Kensington, and Frenchie, you might know this too, living in Philadelphia, a lot of people immediately think, oh, like new home construction and restaurants opening. And, it's adjacent to a neighborhood called Fishtown. Yes. That's very kind of trendy.
Days, yeah.
Right. And Kensington itself has a lot going on in the realm of art and culture, not just through gentrification, also just it has a long history of art and culture. In fact, one of Philadelphia's performing arts high schools is located in Kensington.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. So Kensington is very cool and actually has been for a long time. I'm not saying it's very cool because of gentrification, but kind of despite gentrification, it has a sort of an amazing history. And that's what I tried to portray in the book as well, beginning with the epigraph that opens the book, which is a sort of an excerpt from what I would describe as almost a press release from the late 1800s about Kensington. And its amazing factories, and it's a historical, a primary source, a historical document that details the way that Kensington was at one time.
That's really fascinating. I liked how in the book you talk about Kensington, and it kind of becomes its own character, and it has a compassionate side as well. You see the community really, trying to work together and help each other out, which I thought was absolutely beautiful. So I haven't visited yet, but I will at some point.
Are you a lot of organizations there?
Oh, great! I will. Second question. You ready?
Yeah.
Cool. So this is Alice from Colorado. And she says, Long Bright River touches on the opioid crisis, sex workers, corrupt policing, complex familial relationships. After completing the book, did you feel generally hopeful or generally exhausted, and why?
That's a great question. I think it's very important when making art about addiction, to not become bogged down in a sense of despair or hopelessness. What I can tell you, from witnessing addiction in my own family and from speaking with people with addiction in Kensington and elsewhere, is it certainly can be a difficult cycle to break, and it would be wrong to underestimate how insidious opioids are in affecting chemistry of the brain. But I can also tell you that I've spoken to a lot of people who have been in recovery for years or even decades, successfully. And I think it's a mistake to think of addiction as something unbreakable as well. So the ending of the book, I guess I'm allowed to talk about it because you...
Yeah, that's fine.
At the ending of the book, we are in a moment of hope. Casey is in a moment of recovery, and has been found alive. And sort of the question of the fate of the next generation of children hangs in the balance, I guess. But I also, I wanted to portray that realistically too. These are kids who, because of their early exposure to opioid medication, have a bit of an uphill battle. And it's a complex, multifaceted issue. Kids with NAS, neonatal abstinence syndrome, certainly have they have been exposed to a substance that does alter their sort of biology, their chemistry in a particular way. But many of them will recover beautifully from that and will go on to lead happy, productive lives. So it's sort of an issue with two different sides. And as for me personally, whether I feel hope or despair, I guess both. I feel despair about how alarmingly certain government systems have failed the population, and a lack of oversight into the way that pharmaceuticals are marketed has failed sort of a generation of Americans. I feel hope from speaking with people who are in recovery, and from the fact that certain legislative measures have been imposed since the invention, the release of OxyContin in 1996, that ensure that it will not be overprescribed as much as it once was. Mm-hmm. And certain other measures, such as safe injection sites, are becoming possibilities in the United States, not just abroad. So a harm reduction approach is becoming recognized as the most viable option.
Yeah, which is something that I was completely unaware of. And I actually learned a lot from reading this book, just the injection sites, the methadone clinics, and even just women going to help holding babies because they're suffering from withdrawal as they're born. I mean, there's something I had never considered in my whole life.
Yeah, that's something I think about all the time during this pandemic. Is sadly, this will be a sad little tangent, but yes, in NICUs, specifically NICUs for babies with NAS, there's a program that enables volunteers to come in and just hold babies born with neonatal abstinence syndrome, because it's so helpful to have sort of human touch and human contact. Yeah. But during the pandemic, that I can't speak for every NICU, but for many of them, that's no longer allowed. And that breaks my heart. I hate thinking about that.
Yeah.
For the sake of the babies, that the pandemic ends soon as well.
All right, I'm going to move on to the third question. And that's from Nancy from California. And she said, you said in an interview that you conceived your characters and then that you wait until they see where they will take you. Do you feel at some point as an author that they take over and tell you which direction you should go?
Yeah, that's a great question and a good encapsulation of how it feels when a book is working well. Typically at the start of a novel, I only know who my characters are, where they are in place and time, and what their initial problem is. So in the case of Long Bright River, I knew that my main characters would be Mickey and Casey. And I knew that they would be in and around Kensington, Philadelphia, and I knew that that Casey would go missing and Mickey would have to find her. But I didn't really know much beyond that. So I write and write whenever I'm starting a novel. I write and write and write until I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of who the characters are, and then from there, I do kind of let the characters tell me if what I'm asking them to do feels right, and if I sort of send them out on a quest that doesn't feel right, or if I have them make a decision that doesn't feel in character for them, then I bring them back to sort of the last moment in the book that I felt worked or felt authentic, and then I try something else. So it really is sort of everything's based on character.
Right. It's kind of like being an actor, or maybe living the lives of your characters and going through all of their ordeals.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, there's this tasking, right? Whenever you write after that, you just...
Yes, it's a long, tiring process to write a novel, but a rewarding one for sure. Mm-hmm. I really feel like I'm myself if I'm not at work on something.
Moving on to question number 4 from Leanne, who's from Florida. She writes, loneliness seems to be at the heart of Long Bright River and Heft, and the hard work it takes your characters to accept being vulnerable enough to seek out human connections. Is this something that you worry about? And if so, do you worry that we will only get worse in a post-COVID world when people have been sheltered from others for so long?
What a profound question. Yes, the theme of loneliness often comes up in my work. A novel of mine called Heft also dealt with loneliness for sure, as does all of my work in some capacity. But yeah, I mean, as we become more and more used to interfacing with other humans through screens, I would imagine that even after COVID, assuming that it ends at some point, that even after in a post-COVID world, some of our practices and our habits will become different. Maybe it will become normal to have like Zoom parties or to have Zoom chats with friends, which can be a connecting force, but also if that becomes something that we grow too accustomed to, there's a kind of alchemy that happens when a bunch of people are in the same room together that is hard to replicate online. And I would miss that. I know.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like it's an easy enough excuse now to not want to step out of our houses. But like you said, when you're in a group of people, there's something else that happens.
Yeah.
That you can't really have through a screen. Not as much.
I agree.
Phil from Oregon is saying the book revolves around the great divide between two sisters. But interestingly enough, you are using a stylistic divide to explain the source of the rift. Chapters are divided between the then and the now. Was this intentional? And did you write the chapters one after the other? Or did you write two different narratives, which you then weave back into one big story?
I came to the idea of dividing the book into then and now sections somewhat late in the writing process. And largely it was just a way to keep the text sort of organized in my mind and the reader's mind. I didn't want, at first I was thinking about doing actual specific years, 19 1999 or 2003 or whatever, but
Right.
I found that too complicated and too jarring. And I worried that readers would spend too much time trying to keep track of a timeline that was unnecessarily complicated. So the terms now and then felt to me less distracting. All the readers really needed to keep track of was the idea that, okay, now we're in the past and now we're in the present. And so eventually I decided on those.
Was this a ploy for you to try and little by little strip your characters so that we finally get to their raw essence?
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, it's clear that the sisters' past really informs their present selves. And each one of those then sections not only kind of contributes to our understanding of who they are as people, but also kind of unravels the central mystery, because we're not really able to understand where Casey has gone until we understand what Mickey has done to cause her to make herself absent.
Disappear completely, yeah. I'll move on to a question from Alex, who's from New York. And he asked if you experienced any backlash after denouncing the police corruption in your book.
It's interesting. I haven't yet. I anticipate that I may at some point, especially if it becomes a series. I think television usually reaches a wider audience than books do. So it's possible. But I also think that there is sort of incontrovertible evidence that police corruption does exist in not just the Philadelphia Police Department, but in almost, all police departments in major cities have cases on the record of police corruption. And in this case, police sexual assault of sex workers is a very real thing that has happened in Kensington. I began hearing stories about that when I first visited the neighborhood. Through sort of a whisper network. But when I first began writing the novel, there was no formal documentation of those events, only stories I heard aloud from women in the neighborhood. In 2019, the Philadelphia Inquirer did an expose on a series of internal documents that were released of police files where certain police officers were placed on suspension by the PPD for acts, including, in one case, a sexual assault on a woman in Kensington. So, for whatever you think
that was
about.
Proof.
Right. Whatever your personal belief system is when it comes to policing in America, it is hard to deny the fact that corruption exists in police departments. And in some cases, police officers have committed assaults, which is documented in their own internal files. So, I don't know how you can argue against that or why that would be controversial, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think I've got the time just for one final question for you. It's the most important one, and it's from me. Have you ever been on a cruise?
So I've never been on a multi-day cruise. The closest experience I've ever had was when I was a kid growing up in New England. We would do whale watching trips every now and then. But I've never been overnight on a ship. Maybe
if you were to go on a cruise, where do you think you would like to go?
Oh, good question. I have not ever spent time in and around any country in Asia. So I'd love to see Japan, for example, or China. And seeing it by ship would be very cool.
Yeah, I've actually spent my last few contracts on the Diamond Princess, which was located in Japan. So I can tell you it's absolutely amazing. And the culture over there is fantastic. So Great. When you get a chance, for sure. Now, I know that I did say that I was going to ask you one last question, but I have one more. It's more like a favor, if you don't mind. I would like you to, if possible, do us the honor of revealing what the next book of the month for October is going to be.
Absolutely, yes. It is my pleasure to reveal that the next book will be The Henna Artist by Alka Joshi.
Ta-da! And now we have it. Now, for all of our readers out there, The Henna Artist is a story that follows a young girl who's 17 at the beginning of the story. Her name is Lakshmi, and it's based in India in the 50s. And she basically leaves her marriage, which was a very unhappy marriage. And then a few years later, we find her again in the city of Jaipur, where she's finally established herself and finally made a life for herself. But somehow, at that point, her past comes colliding back. Dun, dun, dun. So this is the main story. But we'll talk about it in October. This is exciting. In the meantime, I just wanted to thank you, Liz, so much for taking some time and chatting with us and answering our readers' questions. It's been amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I'll see you around the neighborhood.
You never know when this thing is all over, for sure. And for those of you who haven't read Long Bright River yet, or any of Liz Other's books, then you can check her online. She's got a website and her Instagram page as well. And all of the books are available for purchase online as well as in your favorite bookshops. But thanks again, everybody, for choosing us and for looking at Instagram page. We'll be back next month. If you want more information on the book club, you can check us out on Instagram, but also on our Princess website, which is www.princess.com. And that's where you can find the latest about the book club. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next month.